The autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and damp earth, a gentle warning that winter was waiting just around the corner. Leo Martinez zipped up his son's thin jacket, pulling the hood over his dark curls. "You? Got everything, champ?" he asked, his voice a low rumble of warmth against the morning chill. Sam nodded, clutching a small, worn backpack to his chest. Like it held treasure, he had his juice box, his half-eaten granola bar, and his favorite dinosaur figurine, a tiny triceratops with a chipped horn that Leo had superglued back on more times than he could count. That was their life. A collection of carefully repaired things, a testament to making things last. Leo's own hands were proof of that. Calloused and stained with the memory of soil and grease from his landscaping work, they were the hands of a man who fixed fences and mowed lawns and tried to build a world for his 7-year-old son out of whatever he could find. Or mend. He glanced at the dashboard of his old pickup truck. The gas gauge hovered just above empty, a familiar and persistent anxiety tightening its grip in his chest. Every dollar was a calculation, every mile, a choice. He had enough for gas to get them to the park and back, with a little left over for groceries later. If he stuck to the list, no extras, no treats, no room for error. It was a tightrope walk, a life measured in small increments, but as long as Sam was smiling, it felt like enough. He just wished he could give him more. More than patched jeans and free afternoons at the public park. More than a life defined by what they couldn't afford. He thought of her then, as he always did in these quiet moments of self-doubt. His ex-wife, a woman who had looked at their simple life and called it a cage before leaving for one with gilded bars, and a man who measured love in carats and square footage. The memory was a dull ache, a scar that reminded him why he built his walls so high, why he taught himself to be enough on his own, because the alternative, trusting someone else with his heart, had cost him everything. Or so he thought, as they pulled into a parking spot beside the sprawling green of Meadowbrook Park. Sam was already unbuckling his seatbelt, a ball of pure, unfiltered joy. "Can we go to the big slide first, Dad?" "You got it, buddy," Leo said, forcing a smile that pushed the worry back into the corners of his mind. For the next few hours, he would be just a dad, not a man, drowning in unpaid bills, not a man haunted by a ghost in a designer dress, just a dad at the Sovens will park, with the only person in the world who mattered. And for now, that had to be enough. The park was a kaleidoscope of fall colors. Fiery reds and brilliant golds painted across the leaves of the towering oak trees. A gentle breeze whispered through the branches, scattering them across the grass like confetti. Leo sat on a worn wooden bench, his back to the sun, letting its faint warmth seep into his tired shoulders. He watched Sam, a small figure in a bright blue jacket, racing toward the playground, his laughter echoing in the crisp air like a melody. It was moments like these that fueled him, the uncomplicated joy in his son's eyes, the freedom of an open field, the simple pleasure of a shared afternoon that cost nothing but time. This was their sanctuary, a place where the pressures of their life could momentarily fade into the background. Here he wasn't a landscaper struggling to make ends meet, he was just Dad, the man who could push a swing high enough to touch the sky. The man who knew the best spots for finding interesting-looking rocks. The weight of the world felt lighter here, carried on the wings of his son's happiness. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds of the park, the rhythmic creak of the swings, the distant chatter of other families, the cheerful shouts of children lost in their own worlds of make-believe. It was a symphony of simple, everyday life. And Leo let it wash over him, a calming balm on his frayed nerves. He had learned to find peace in these small pockets of quiet, to appreciate the beauty that didn't come with a price tag. It was a lesson born of necessity, but one that had shaped him into the man he was today. A man who understood the value of presence over presence of time, over treasures. He opened his eyes again, scanning the playground for Sam. He spotted him near the sandpit, digging with a plastic shovel he'd found abandoned near the slide. His movements were focused, his brow furrowed in concentration. A tiny architect building a kingdom of sand. Imagination. Leo smiled. A genuine smile this time, one that reached his eyes and softened the tired lines around them. This was his world, his reason, his everything. As long as he had this, he could face whatever came next. The gas gauge, the duty brio, unpaid bills, the lingering ghost of a past he couldn't change. They all seemed to shrink in the presence of his son's boundless spirit. He took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs with a sense of clarity, for now this moment was perfect, and he would hold on to it tightly, a small fragile thing to carry him through the colder days ahead. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink when the quiet rhythm of the afternoon was broken by a sound that didn't belong. It was a small sound at first almost lost in the rustle of the leaves, a soft hiccuping cry that cut through the cheerful noise of the playground. Leo sat up straighter, his senses on high alert, his gaze sweeping across the park until it landed on a small figure huddled by the swings. Her face was buried in her hands, her tiny shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She was alone, her bright pink coat a stark splash of color against the muted tones of the fading day. Sam saw her too. He stopped digging his head, tilting with the innocent curiosity of a child who hadn't yet learned to look away from someone else's pain. He looked at his dad, a silent question in his eyes. Leo gave a slight nod, and Sam trotted over to the girl, his steps hesitant at first, then more confident as he got closer. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft. The girl looked up, her face streaked with tears, her big blue eyes wide and lost. She shook her head, a fresh wave of sobs racking her small frame. "I can't find my mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling. Leo stood up, his own heart clenching in sympathy. He had a rule about not getting involved, a self-preservation tactic honed by years of minding his own business. But this was different. This was a child, a lost child, who looked no older than Sam. He walked over slowly, keeping a safe distance so as not to frighten her more. "Hey there," he said, his voice calm and gentle. "What's your name?" The girl sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Mia," she mumbled. Leo smiled kindly. "That's a beautiful name, Maya. I'm Leo. And this is my son Sam. We can help you find your mommy. Where did you see her last?" Mia pointed a shaky finger toward the jogging path that wound its way through the trees. "She was right there," she said, her voice filled with a desperate certainty that only a child can possess. Leo scanned the path, but it was empty. The shadows were growing longer, and the park was starting to feel bigger, lonelier. He knew that feeling all too well. That sudden, chilling realization that you were on your own in a world that had suddenly turned unfamiliar and cold. He wouldn't let this little girl feel that for a second longer than she had to. He knelt down to her level, his eyes warm and reassuring. "Don't you worry, Mia," he said softly. "We're not going anywhere until we find her." Sam reached into his backpack and pulled out his triceratops with the chipped horn. He held it out to Mia, his small hand steady. "You can hold him," he said seriously. "He's very brave." Maya looked at the dinosaur, then at Sam, and for the first time a tiny flicker of a smile touched her lips. She took the toy, her fingers curling around its familiar shape, and her toy sobs began to subside. Leo watched the simple act of kindness, a small bridge built between two children, and felt a pang of pride, so fierce it almost hurt. This was what mattered. This was the world he was trying to build, for his son, a world where you didn't walk past someone who was hurting you, stopped. You offered what you had, even if it was just a broken dinosaur and a little bit of your time. He knew the feeling of being lost all too well, not just in a park, but in life. He had spent years navigating the disorienting landscape of single fatherhood, a world of scraped knees and bedtime stories, and a constant gnawing worry that he wasn't doing enough. He had learned to be a fortress for his son, a steady, presence in a world that had taken too much from them. Already looking at Mia's tear-streaked face, he saw a reflection of that same vulnerability. A small soul adrift in a sea of uncertainty. He couldn't fix her problem, but he could offer her an anchor. A moment of calm in the storm of her fear. He knelt on the cool grass, his knees pressing into the damp earth. His voice was low and steady, the same voice he used for Sam's nightmares. "It's okay to be scared, Mia. But you're not alone now. See?" He pointed to a large oak tree a few yards away. "That's our home base. We'll wait right here for your mom sometimes. When you're lost, it's best to stay in one place, so the person looking for you can find you." His words seemed to ground her, the logic simple and clear enough for a child to grasp. She nodded, her grip on the toy dinosaur tightening Sam ever. The thoughtful host sat down beside her and opened his backpack. He pulled out his half-eaten granola bar and broke it in two, offering her the larger piece. "It's got chocolate chips," he said, as if that were the highest form of currency. Leo's heart swelled at the gesture. He hadn't taught Sam to share like that. It was just who he was, a small boy with a big heart, a reflection of the best parts of the world Leo hoped to create for him. They sat in a small circle on the grass, a strange little trio, a lost girl, a kind boy, and a man who understood the language of quiet comfort. The minutes stretched on each one. Feeling longer than the last, Leo kept his gaze fixed on the path, his senses sharp, waiting for the sound of approaching footsteps, for the call of a mother's voice, cutting through the evening air. He could feel Mia's anxiety, a low, thrumming hum beside him, and he started to talk to her about silly things, about the shapes of the clouds, about whether squirrels liked peanut butter, just as Sam did anything to keep the silence from growing too heavy, and just as a new wave of fear began to creep into his own chest. He heard it, a frantic voice calling a name. "Mia, Mia, where are you?" The call was sharp-edged with panic and relief. Leo stood up slowly, his hand resting gently on Mia's shoulder, as a woman burst through the trees, her face pale, her eyes wide and searching. She wasn't dressed for a frantic search. Through a park, her clothes were simple, a pair of dark jeans and a soft cashmere sweater, but they hung on her with an understated elegance that spoke of a world far removed from Leo's own. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, as if she'd run her hands through it 100 times. And a pair of expensive-looking sunglasses were pushed on top of her head. Even in her disheveled state, she moved with a certain grace, a poise that seemed ingrained in her very bones. "Mommy!" Mia cried, a wave of pure relief washing over her face. She dropped the dinosaur and ran toward the woman, who scooped her up into a fierce hug, burying her face in her daughter's hair. "Oh my God, Mia, I was so worried. I turned around and you were just gone." The woman whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She held her daughter tightly, rocking her back and forth, as if to reassure herself that she was real, that she was safe. Leo watched them for a moment, giving them their space. The raw, unfiltered love between a mother and child was a sacred thing, a language he understood all too well. He bent down to pick up the forgotten triceratops, its chipped horn, a small testament to the brief connection that had been forged in a moment of fear. He held it in his palm, feeling its familiar weight as the woman finally looked up, her eyes meeting his across the small patch of grass. They were the same striking blue as her daughter's, but they held a different kind of depth, a weariness that went beyond the panic of a lost child. "Thank you," she said, her voice still shaky. "Thank you so much." She set Mia down gently, but kept a hand firmly on her shoulder, her gaze still locked on Leo's. "I don't know what I would have done." Leo gave a small nod and walked toward them, holding out the dinosaur. "She's a brave kid," he said simply. "My son found her by the swings." The woman's eyes flicked to Sam, who was now standing shyly behind his dad, a half-eaten granola bar still in his hand. She offered him a small, grateful smile, then turned her attention back to Leo. "I need to pay you for your trouble. Please let me," she said, reaching into her pocket and pulling out a slim leather wallet. The gesture was automatic, reflexive. the solution of someone used to solving problems with money. Leo's posture stiffened slightly, a familiar wall of pride. Rising within him, he shook his head before she could even open the wallet. "No need," he said, his voice polite but firm. "We were happy to help. It's just what people do." The woman froze her hand, hovering over the clasp of her wallet. Her expression was one of genuine surprise, as if his refusal was a language she didn't often hear. She studied him for a moment longer, her eyes taking in his worn jacket, his calloused hands, the quiet dignity in his stance. "I'm Clara," she said finally, tucking the wallet away, her voice softer, now less frantic. "Leo," he replied, "and this is Sam." Clara knelt down to her daughter's level again. "Mia, what do you say to Leo and Sam?" Mia mumbled a shy "thank you." Her eyes on the ground, Clara smiled and brushed a stray leaf from her daughter's hair. Then she stood and faced Leo again, her gaze unwavering. "Well, Leo," she said, her voice holding a new note of something he couldn't quite place. "Not everyone is like you." The air between them hummed with an unspoken current, a silent acknowledgement that something more than just a lost child had been found in the park that day. Clara lingered for a moment longer, her hand still resting on Mia's shoulder, as if she were reluctant to break the fragile connection that had formed in the fading light she looked from Mia's. Leo's steady gaze to Sam's shy smile, and a flicker of something unreadable crossed her face. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper, something that looked a lot like longing. "We should go," she said finally, her voice a soft murmur. "It's getting late." Leo nodded, understanding the silent dismissal, even if it felt reluctant. He watched as she took Mia's hand, her fingers lacing through her daughter's with a gentle possessiveness as they turned to leave. Mia looked back over her shoulder and gave Sam a small wave. He waved back a slow, hesitant motion, his eyes wide with the solemnity of a new friendship made and lost in the span of an afternoon. Leo felt a strange pang in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. It was a mix of relief and something else, something that felt like a missed opportunity. He had spent so much of his life building walls to keep people out, to protect himself and his son from the kind of hurt that comes from letting someone in too close. But as he watched Clara and Mia walk away, their figures shrinking against the darkening landscape, he couldn't help but wonder what it would have been like to let that wall crumble just a little. He shook his head, clearing the thought before it could take root. It was foolish to think that way. He and Clara were from different worlds, a fact that was evident in every thread of her cashmere sweater, every quiet syllable of her polished speech. Their paths had crossed by chance, a brief intersection in a journey that would undoubtedly take them in opposite directions. Still, he couldn't shake the image of her face when he had refused her money. The genuine surprise in her eyes, the way she had looked at him as if he were a rare and fascinating creature. He was used to being overlooked, to being seen as just another landscaper, another man struggling to get by. But for a fleeting moment, Clara had seen something else. She had seen a man of principle, a man who valued kindness over cash, and that acknowledgement had stirred something in him, something that had been dormant for a long time. Sam tugged at his sleeve. "Is she coming back?" he asked, his voice. Small Leo looked down at his son and managed a smile. "I don't think so, buddy," he said gently. "But that was a really nice thing you did, sharing your dinosaur." Sam beamed his chest, puffing out with pride, as they walked back to their truck. The last of the sun's light disappeared below the 12th horizon, leaving the park bathed in a cool blue twilight. Leo buckled Sam in, then slid into the driver's seat. The old engine coughed to life with a familiar groan. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the empty space where their paths had crossed. But all he saw was the darkness and the long road ahead, a road that suddenly felt a little lonelier than it had before that night in her suite at the city's most exclusive hotel. The silence was a physical presence, a weight that pressed down on Clara Vance. As she stared out at the glittering skyline, the city lights stretched out before her, a tapestry of ambition and power, the world she had built. Of the world she had mastered, but tonight it felt hollow, a beautiful but empty stage. She had just put Mia to bed, tucking her into the crisp white sheets of the hotel's oversized bed. The little girl had fallen asleep, almost instantly, her hand still clutching the broken triceratops that Sam had given her, a small plastic relic from a world that felt 1,000,000 miles away from this one. Clara ran a hand through her hair, the gesture weary and repetitive. She couldn't stop. Replaying the scene in the park, Leo's calm voice, his steady hands, the quiet dignity with which he had refused her money. It was a gesture, so simple, yet so profound in its rarity in her world. Everything had a price. Every favor was a price transaction. Every act of kindness was a calculated move on a chessboard. She was used to people wanting something from her, her name, her connections, her money. But Leo had wanted nothing. He had simply given his time, his comfort, his son's favorite toy. Without a second thought, it was a currency she had forgotten existed, and its value struck her with a force that left her breathless. She walked over to the window, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet she thought of. Leo's worn jacket, the grease under his fingernails, the quiet pride in his eyes. He had so little by the world's standards, yet he seemed to possess a richness that she, with all her wealth, had never been able to acquire. It was a richness of character, of spirit, of love, and it was a world she desperately wanted to understand. She had spent years building an empire, a legacy, a name that commanded respect, but in the process she had built walls around her heart, walls so high and so thick that she had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen, not as a CEO, not as a Vance, but as a person. Leo had seen her in the park. He had seen her panic, her fear, her relief, and he had met it not with judgment or opportunism, but with a simple human connection that had shattered her carefully constructed composure. She touched the cool glass of the window, her reflection staring back at her, a woman with everything and nothing at all. A deep yearning bloomed in her chest, a desire to feel that kind of realness again, to step out of the gilded cage she had built for herself, and into a world where kindness was not a strategy, but a reflex. She didn't know if she would ever see Leo again, but she knew that their brief encounter had changed something within her. It had planted a seed of doubt about the life she was leading, and a seed of hope for a life she had yet to imagine, a life where the most valuable things couldn't be bought or sold, but were simply given freely from one heart to another. 2 days later, a persistent drizzle fell from a steel-gray sky, blurring the edges of the world and making the park look melancholic and deserted. Leo had brought Sam back, not because he expected to see anyone, but because Sam had insisted that his triceratops was lonely and needed to visit his friend. Mia. Leo knew it was a long shot, a child's hopeful fantasy, but he couldn't bring himself to say no. So they sat on the same bench as before, a large umbrella shielding them from the rain, watching the empty swings sway gently in the breeze. Sam was quiet, his usual ebullient energy dampened by the weather and the faint disappointment of an unanswered wish. Leo's own heart felt heavy, a reflection of the gloomy day. He told himself it was ridiculous to feel this way, to be so affected by a chance encounter with a stranger. But he couldn't deny the void that had settled in his chest since he had watched Clara and Mia walk away. It was a loneliness he hadn't realized he was carrying until she had briefly illuminated it just as he was about to suggest they head home. A car pulled into the parking lot, a sleek black sedan that looked out of place against the backdrop of the dreary park. The driver's side door opened, and Clara stepped out, holding a pink umbrella that matched the coat her daughter had worn. She saw them immediately, and her steps faltered for a moment, as if she were surprised to see them too. But then she continued walking toward them, her expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. "I thought you might be here," she said, her voice soft against the drumming of the rain. Maya hasn't stopped talking about Sam and his brave dinosaur. Leo stood up, his heart giving a small jolt. Sam's been talking about Maya, too. He gestured to the empty space on the bench beside him, an unspoken invitation. She sat down the two umbrellas, creating a small, intimate shelter from the rain. The kids, shy at first, began to chatter about their respective toys. Their voices, a soft counterpoint to the pitter-patter of the rain. Clara turned to Leo, a small smile playing on her lips. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said," she admitted, her gaze direct and unwavering. "About it just being what people do." Leo shrugged, a little uncomfortable under her intense scrutiny. "It's the truth." "Maybe," she said, "but it's a truth I haven't encountered in a very long time." She paused, her eyes searching his. "I was wondering if I could thank you properly this time, not with money, but with coffee." The invitation hung in the air, a fragile bridge between their two worlds. Leo hesitated, his mind a whirlwind of doubts and fears. She was everything he had taught himself to avoid, wealthy, polished, a reminder of a past that still had the power to wound. But then he looked at her, at the genuine hope in her eyes, at the way she had come back to this rainy park, on the off chance of finding them, and something inside him shifted. Maybe, just maybe, this time was different. "I'd like that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, and as he spoke, the rain seemed to soften its rhythm, a gentle percussion to the start of something new and unexpected. The coffee shop was a small, cozy place, tucked away on a side street, its windows steamy from the warmth inside and the air thick with the scent of roasted beans and cinnamon. Leo felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach as they stepped through the door. This was her world, not his, a world of $10 lattes and artisanal pastries, a world where he felt acutely aware of the frayed cuffs on his jacket and the mud on his boots. But Clara seemed to sense his discomfort. She chose a small table in the corner, away from the main flow of traffic, and spoke to the barista with an easy familiarity that put him slightly more at ease. The kids sat beside each other in a large armchair, their heads bent over a coloring book that Clara had magically produced from her bag, their quiet chatter a comforting hum in the background. Clara returned to the table with 2 steaming mugs and a plate of warm croissants. She pushed the plate toward him. "Please," she said, "it's the least I can do." Leo took one, his fingers brushing against the warm, flaky pastry. He still felt out of place, a rough-hewn man in a world of polished surfaces, but he was trying for Sam, for all a brighter. The flicker of hope that had ignited in his chest when she had invited him here. "So," Clara said, stirring her coffee, her gaze thoughtful, "you're a landscaper?" Leo nodded. "Yeah, run my own small business, mostly residential stuff. Mowing lawns, planting flower beds, fixing sprinklers, the glamorous life." He said it with a hint of self-deprecation, but Clara didn't smile. "It's honest work," she said seriously. "You create beauty, you make things grow. That's a rare skill." Her words surprised him. He was used to people dismissing his work as manual labor, something to be looked down upon, but she saw it as something more, something valuable. It was a small thing, but it chipped away at the wall he had so carefully constructed around his heart. They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing more easily than he had expected. They talked about their kids, about the challenges of single parenthood, about their favorite kinds of music and their least favorite vegetables. They skirted around the edges of their pasts, 2 dancers circling each other on a floor of unspoken truths. But the connection between them was undeniable, a current of understanding that flowed beneath the surface of their words. Leo found himself relaxing his shoulders, unclenching his smile. Coming more naturally, he looked at Clara, really looked at her not as a wealthy woman from another world, but as a person, a woman with a quick wit, a gentle laugh, and eyes that held a universe of stories. He was still scared, still wary. But for the first time in a long time he was also intrigued. wanted to know more about the woman who saw beauty in his calloused hands and value in his simple life. As they left the coffee shop, the rain had stopped. Leaving the world washed clean and glistening under a sliver of afternoon sun, the air felt lighter, fresher, and so did Leo's heart. He didn't know where this was going. He didn't know if it was going anywhere at all. But as he watched Clara say goodbye to Sam with a promise of another playdate, soon he allowed himself a small sliver of hope, a tiny seed planted in the fertile ground of an unexpected connection. A seed that he hoped would have the chance to grow. Leo found his thoughts drifting to Clara more often than he was comfortable with. During the following week, he'd be in the middle of trimming a hedge or replacing a sprinkler head, and her face would flash in his mind. Her easy smile, the intelligent curiosity in her eyes, the way she had listened to him as if his words truly mattered. It was a dangerous and intoxicating feeling. He knew he was playing with fire, that he was stepping into a world. He didn't understand a world that had burned him before, but the pull was undeniable. He was drawn to her not just for her beauty or her grace, but for the quiet strength he saw beneath her polished exterior, the vulnerability she allowed him to glimpse in moments of unguarded honesty. They met again a few days later at the park, this time under a brilliant blue sky. The pretense of a chance encounter was gone, replaced by the quiet acknowledgement of a deliberate choice. The kids ran off to play their laughter, a joyful soundtrack to the burgeoning connection between their parents. Leo and Clara sat on the grass, a comfortable distance between them, a shared bag of apple slices sitting on the blanket he had brought. "I've been thinking about what you said." Leo started, his voice hesitant. "About my work." Clara turned to him, her expression open and encouraging. "It's true," she said. "There's a nobility in creating something with your own hands, in nurturing life from the ground up." Leo looked down at his hands, the dirt still ingrained in the creases of his knuckles. "Most people don't see it that way. Most people are blind to what really matters," she replied softly, her words a gentle validation of his life's work, a stark contrast to the judgment he had faced from his ex-wife, who had called his passion a dead-end job. He felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost stole his breath. He had spent so long feeling inadequate for his choices, for the simple life he had built, but Clara saw it differently. She saw strength where others saw struggle. She saw value where others saw lack. It was a perspective that was slowly but surely beginning to heal. A wound he hadn't even realized was still open. They talked for hours, their conversation weaving through a tapestry of topics from the profound to the mundane. He told her about his dream of one day owning a small nursery, a place where he could cultivate rare and beautiful plants, a dream he had long since packed away on a dusty shelf of impossible desires. She listened with rapt attention, her eyes shining with an understanding that went beyond mere politeness. She saw the passion in his voice, the love he had for the earth, and she nurtured it with her encouragement, her belief in his vision. He found himself opening up to her in a way he hadn't with anyone in years. He told her about Sam's first word, about his love for dinosaurs, about the way his laughter could fill the silence of their small apartment and make it feel like a palace. She listened to it all, every small detail, every quiet confession, and in her listening he felt himself being seen, being known in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. It was a feeling he hadn't realized he was starving for until she had offered it to him, a feast of acceptance and understanding that nourished his soul and left him wanting more. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm, a pattern of shared moments and quiet discoveries. Leo and Clara began to carve out a space for themselves in the midst of their separate lives, a fragile territory built on coffee shop conversations, and sun-drenched afternoons at the park. It was a world that existed in the in-between, in the stolen hours and whispered confidences, a world that felt both intensely real and dangerously precarious. Leo was constantly aware of the chasm that separated their lives. He would see it in the small details. The effortless way Clara paid for their coffees with a tap of her sleek phone, the designer sunglasses. She would casually toss onto the bench. The way she spoke of travel and art with a casual familiarity that he could only dream of. Each of these small reminders was a pinprick to his carefully constructed sense of self. A whisper of doubt that he was out of his depth, that he was a temporary diversion in a life that would eventually move on without him. But then he would look into her eyes and the fear would recede. She never made him feel less than never, flaunted her wealth, or made him feel like a project. She met him where he was on the worn grass of the park, on the cracked pavement of the coffee shop parking lot, and she saw him not for what he had, but for who he was. One afternoon, as they were watching the kids build a lopsided sandcastle, Clara turned to him, her expression serious. "I want you to know something, Leo," she said, her voice low and earnest. "I'm not who you think I am." Leo's heart gave a lurch, a cold dread seeping into his veins. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tight. "I mean, my life is more complicated than I've let on," she said, choosing her words carefully. "There are things I've been running from, things that I'm not proud of." She didn't elaborate. She didn't offer details. She just left the words hanging in the air between them, a veiled confession, a warning, a plea for understanding. Leo didn't press her. He didn't ask for the secrets she wasn't ready to share. He simply nodded, his gaze steady and reassuring. "We all have complicated lives, Clara," he said softly. "We all have things we're running from." It was the truth, his own truth, and in that moment of shared vulnerability, the chasm between them seemed to shrink. The distance between their two worlds felt a little less vast. He didn't know what her secrets were. He didn't know what complications she was hiding, but he knew that he was willing to face them with her, to stand beside her in the messiness of her life, just as she had stood beside him in the simplicity of his. It was a silent promise, a commitment made without words, a testament to the growing bond between them, a bond that was becoming stronger and more resilient with each shared moment, each quiet confession, and each courageous step they took toward each other across the treacherous landscape of their different worlds. He should have been more cautious. He knew that every rational part of his brain screamed at him to pull back, to protect himself and his son from the inevitable heartbreak that seemed to follow wealth and complication, but his heart had a mind of its own, a stubborn and hopeful organ that refused to listen to reason. It had been captured by Clara's quiet strength, by her gentle spirit, by the way she made him feel seen and valued, in a way he had never experienced before. He was falling for her, a slow and terrifying descent into a feeling he had long since sworn off, a feeling that felt a lot like love. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, a crisp, cream-colored envelope that felt out of place among the usual stack of bills and junk mail. Leo opened it with a sense of trepidation, his fingers fumbling with the seal inside. It was a heavy cardstock invitation to a charity gala, a fundraising event for the city's botanical gardens. Clara's name was listed on the host committee, a small, elegant script that seemed to leap off the page. A handwritten note was tucked inside. "I know this isn't your scene," it read, "but it would mean the world to me if you would come as my guest, just for a little while. I want to show you a part of my world, just like you've shown me yours." The request sent a fresh wave of anxiety through him. A gala, a room full of wealthy donors and powerful people. It was the very embodiment of the world that had rejected him, the world that his ex-wife had chosen over him. He didn't own a suit. We didn't know the first thing about schmoozing or making small talk with people who measured success in stock portfolios and summer homes. He was a landscaper, a man who was more comfortable with dirt under his nails than a champagne flute in his hand. He was about to decline to make up an excuse about work or Sam, but then he looked at the invitation again, at Clara's elegant handwriting, at the quiet plea. In her words, she was asking him to step into her world, to trust her to guide him through a territory that was as foreign to him as his world was to her. It was a risk, a huge risk, but he knew he had to take it. He couldn't keep her at arm's length forever, hiding in the safe bubble of parks. and coffee shops. If he was serious about this about her, he had to be willing to meet her where she was, even if it was a place that terrified him. So he sent her a text, a simple two-word reply that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears and hopes. I'm in. The night of the gala was a blur of polished marble and sparkling chandeliers. The air hummed with the low buzz of 100 conversations, the clinking of glasses and the soft strains of a string quartet playing in the corner. Leo felt like he was an actor in a play. He hadn't rehearsed for wearing a rented tuxedo that felt stiff and unfamiliar, his hands shoved in his pockets to keep them from fidgeting. He had left Sam with a trusted neighbor, a rare night out that felt more like a test than a celebration. Clara was a vision. She wore a deep emerald green dress that shimmered under the lights. Her hair swept up in an elegant chignon that exposed the graceful line of her neck. She moved through the room with an effortless poise, a queen in her court, greeting people with warm smiles and easy laughter. Leo stayed close to her side, a silent shadow in her glittering world. He felt the curious glances, the whispered questions, the polite but assessing stares of people who couldn't quite figure out how he fit into the picture. He was an anomaly, a disruption to the carefully curated order of their world. "Are you okay?" Clara asked, her voice, a soft murmur in his ear. She had sensed his discomfort, his unease. He nodded, trying to force a smile that felt like a grimace. "Just a little out of my element." "You're doing great," she said, squeezing his hand reassuringly. "Just pretend you're observing a new species of exotic plants." The joke was a small lifeline in a sea of anxiety, and he clung to it gratefully. She led him through the plants, crowd introducing him to her friends and colleagues. Her voice never faltering, her pride in him evident in every word she spoke. She didn't make excuses for him, she didn't try to explain him, she simply presented him as he was a man. She admired a man she cared for, and in her unwavering confidence he found a small measure of his own. The evening was a strange and surreal experience, a glimpse into a world of immense wealth and power, a world that felt both seductive, soulless. He listened to conversations about mergers and acquisitions, about trips to Aspen and summers in the Hamptons, and he felt a growing sense of detachment, a confirmation of what he had always believed, that this was not his world. That was not where he belonged. But then he would look at Clara, and he would see the way she navigated this world with a weary grace, the way she held her own against the powerful men and women who vied for her attention, and he would feel a surge of admiration for her strength, her intelligence, her resilience. She was more than just a wealthy woman, she was a force of nature, a woman who had fought for her place in a world that was not always kind to women, and he was proud to be by her side. Even if it was just for one night. As the evening began to wind down, Clara led him to a quiet balcony overlooking the gardens. The cool night air was a welcome relief from the stuffy ballroom. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a sea of 1,000,000 tiny stars. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice soft and sincere. "I know this wasn't easy for you." "It was worth it," he replied, his gaze fixed on her face. "To see you in your element, to understand a little more about who you are." She smiled, a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes and lit them up from within. "This isn't who I am, Leo," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "This is just what I do." She stepped closer, her hand resting on his arm, her touch sending a jolt of electricity through him. "Who I am is the woman who sits on a park bench with you. The woman who laughs at your terrible jokes, the woman who is falling in love with a kind and gentle man who sees the beauty in the world." Her words were a balm to his soul, a healing tonic that soothed the old wounds of the glash, his past. He looked at her, at the vulnerability in her eyes, at the love that shone so clearly on her face, and he knew that he was lost. He was completely and irrevocably in love with her. He leaned in and kissed her, a deep and passionate kiss. that spoke of all the things he couldn't say, of all the fears he had overcome, of all the hope he had found in her embrace. It was a kiss that sealed their connection, a promise of a future that was no longer defined by their separate worlds, but by the one they were building together, a world where a landscaper and a CEO could find common ground in the fertile soil of love and acceptance. The revelation came not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a camera shutter. They were leaving the gala, walking hand in hand through the now empty lobby, when a flash of light blinded them for a second. Leo shielded his eyes instinctually, but it was too late. A lone photographer had been waiting in the shadows, a vulture, a scavenger of private moments. He snapped a few more photos, a greedy smirk on his face before melting back into the darkness of the night. Clara cursed under her breath, her body tensing, her easy grace replaced by a rigid and familiar defensiveness. "Don't worry," she said, her voice tight. "I'll have my team take care of it. It's probably nothing." But it wasn't nothing. The next morning the photo was everywhere, splashed across the front page of every gossip blog and tabloid, a grainy black and white image of them, their hands intertwined, their faces caught in a moment of unguarded intimacy. The headline was sensational and cruel: "Billionaire Clara Vance's new boy toy." A mystery man? Or a garden variety gold digger? Leo stared at the screen of his phone, his stomach twisting into a tight knot. The words were a punch to the gut, a public branding of his deepest insecurities. The world had seen him through their cynical lens, and they had judged him. They had reduced him to a caricature, a stereotype, a man who was only with a powerful woman for her money. The shame was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread through his body, leaving him feeling exposed and raw. He had known this was a risk, had known that stepping into Clara's world would make him a target, but he hadn't been prepared for the sheer brutality of it, for the way they could take something so beautiful and twist it into something so ugly. His phone started ringing, a constant barrage of calls from unknown numbers, from reporters, from curious friends who had seen the news. He didn't answer, he couldn't. He just sat in the silence of his small apartment, the world outside, roaring with a story he had never wanted to be a part of. Clara called a dozen times, her name flashing on his screen, a beacon of hope in a sea of chaos. But he couldn't bring himself to answer. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to explain the depth of his humiliation, the way her world had just confirmed all his worst fears about himself. He felt like a fool, a pawn in a game he didn't understand, and the old walls he had so carefully dismantled came crashing back up, higher and stronger than before. He had to protect himself. He had to protect Sam. He couldn't let them be dragged through the mud of Clara's complicated life. He couldn't let his son be exposed to the kind of cruelty that came with wealth and fame. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He shut down. He retreated into the familiar fortress of his own, making a place where he was safe from the judgment of the world, but a place that was now lonelier and colder than ever before. He had let her in, he had trusted her, and now he was paying the price. A price that felt too high to bear. The storm had broken, and he was drowning in its wake. The days that followed were a blur of muted colors and muffled sounds. Leo moved through his life like a ghost, going through the motions of work and fatherhood, with a heavy and persistent sense of detachment. He avoided the news. He silenced his phone. He deflected the curious questions of his neighbors with vague and non-committal answers. He built a cocoon of silence around himself, a fragile shield against a world that had suddenly become too loud, too intrusive. But the silence couldn't protect him from the ache in his own heart, a constant dull throb that reminded him of what he had lost, of what he had pushed away. Sam was the first to notice the change in his father, the way his smile no longer reached his eyes, the way his laughter was a hollow echo of what it once was. "Are you sad, Dad?" he asked one evening, his voice small and concerned, as they sat at the kitchen table, a half-eaten dinner between them. Leo looked at his son, at the worried frown on his small face, and his heart broke a little more. "Just tired, buddy," He lied, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. Just a lot on my mind. But Sam was too perceptive, too, in tune with his father's moods to be fooled. Is it because of Clara? He asked, his voice barely. A whisper, the name hung in the air between them, a forbidden word, a ghost that haunted. The corners of their small apartment. Leo didn't answer. He couldn't. He just looked away, his jaw tight, with the effort of holding back the flood of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. Clara had tried to reach him a dozen times, her messages, a mix of apologies and pleas and desperate attempts to explain, but he had ignored them all. He had been too hurt, too raw, too afraid to let her back in. He had convinced himself that he was doing the right thing, that he was protecting his son from the chaos of her world. But looking at the sadness in Sam's eyes, he began to wonder if he was just protecting himself from the possibility of more pain. He had chosen safety over love. He had chosen silence over connection. And in doing so, he had created a new kind of prison for himself and his son. A prison of loneliness and regret. A prison whose walls were built with the bricks of his own fear. One rainy afternoon, as Leo was staring blankly out the window, a small piece of paper slid under the door. It was a drawing, a child's rendering of a man, a woman, and a small boy, standing under a rainbow. The figures were crudely drawn, their smiles wide and lopsided, but the love in the image was unmistakable. It was a drawing Sam had made of them a few weeks ago, a happy memory from a time that felt like a lifetime ago. Underneath the rainbow, in Sam's shaky handwriting, were two words: fix it. The plea was a direct hit to Leo's heart. A child's simple and profound understanding of the world, a belief that anything broken could be mended, that any sadness could be healed. He picked up the drawing, his fingers trembling as he traced the rolling outline of the figures. He had been so focused on the storm that he had forgotten about the rainbow. He had been so consumed by his own pain that he had forgotten about the love that had been so real, so tangible, so worth fighting for. He looked at the drawing, then at the rain-streaked window, and a sense of clarity washed over him. He had been a coward. He had let his fear dictate his actions. He had pushed away the best thing that had ever happened to him because he was afraid of getting hurt again, but he was already hurting. He was hurting more now in the silence and the loneliness than he ever had in the face of public scrutiny. He knew what he had to do. He had to fix it. He had to fight for her, for them. For the future that he had so foolishly thrown away. He grabbed his keys, his heart pounding with a new sense of purpose, a renewed sense of hope. He didn't know if it was too late. He didn't know if she would even listen to him, but he had to try. He had to show her that he was not the man the world had painted him to be, that he was a man who was willing to fight for love, a man who was willing to brave the storm to get to the rainbow on the other side. He was a man who was finally ready to be the hero his son already believed him to be. Leo drove through the rain-slicked streets, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his mind a whirlwind of rehearsed apologies and desperate pleas. He didn't have a plan. He just knew he had to see her. He had to look her in the eye and tell her that he had been a fool, that he had let his pride and his fear cloud his judgment. He pulled up in front of her hotel, the same grand and imposing building that had once intimidated him so much, but tonight it just looked like a building, a place where the woman he loved was hiding from the world, and from him he strode through the lobby, his work boots echoing on the polished marble floor. He ignored the curious stares of the staff, the way they sized him up with their cool and assessing gazes. He was not here for them. He was here for her. He took the elevator to her floor, his heart pounding in his chest with a mixture of hope and terror. What if she wouldn't see him? What if she had already moved on? What if he was too late? He knocked on her door, his hand trembling slightly. The silence on the other side was deafening. He knocked again, louder. This time his voice cracking as he called her name. "Clara, it's me. Leo, please, open the door." He waited for what felt like an eternity, every second, stretching out into a painful and agonizing eternity. Then he heard the soft click of the comedy ever. Lock and the door swung open. Clara stood before him, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen from crying. She was wearing a simple gray sweatsuit, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked small and fragile and more beautiful than he had ever seen her. "Leo," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "What are you doing here?" "I came to apologize," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "I was a coward, Clara. I let my fear get the best of me. I pushed you away because I was afraid of getting hurt again, but I was wrong. I was so wrong." He stepped closer, his eyes pleading with her to understand. "I love you, Clara. I love everything about you. Your strength, your kindness, your complicated and messy life. I don't care about the money, or the fame, or what the world thinks of us all. I care about is you." Tears streamed down her face as she listened to his words, her body trembling with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "I love you too, Leo," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "I love you so much." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest, burying his face in her hair. He had been so lost in the darkness of his own making, but now he was home. He was back in the light of her love, and he would never let her go again. They stood there in the doorway of her hotel room, two broken people finding solace and healing in each other's embrace. The storm had passed, and in its wake, they had found a new and deeper understanding of each other, a love that had been tested and tempered by the fires of adversity, a love that was strong enough to weather any storm that came their way. They had a long road ahead of them, a future that was still uncertain and fraught with challenges, but as they stood there together, their hearts beating in unison, they knew that they could face anything. As long as they had each other, they were a team, a family, a testament to the transformative power of love. A love that could bridge any divide, a love that could heal any wound, a love that could turn a rainy day into a beautiful and unforgettable rainbow. The press conference was held in a stark and sterile room, filled with a sea of reporters, their cameras and microphones. A forest of steel and glass. Clara stood at the podium, her hands steady, her gaze unwavering. Leo stood just behind her, a silent and solid presence at her side. He was wearing his work clothes, a clean but faded flannel shirt and jeans, a deliberate choice, a statement of who he was, a man who was not ashamed of his life, of his work, of his love for the woman beside him. Clara began to speak, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the murmur of the room. "I'm not here to answer your questions about my personal life," she said, her words sharp and direct. "I'm here to set the record straight." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment, before continuing. "The man standing beside me is Leo Martinez. He is a landscaper, a father, and the kindest and most honorable man I have ever known. He is not a gold digger. He is not a boy toy. He is the man I love." A wave of whispers and clicks rippled through the room, but Clara didn't flinch. She looked directly into the cameras, her eyes burning with a fierce and protective light. "You have tried to reduce our story to a salacious headline, a tale of class and intrigue, but you have missed the point entirely. Our story is not about money or fame. It's about connection. It's about kindness. It's about two people from different worlds who found a common ground in the simple and profound language of love." She took a deep breath, her voice softening slightly. "Leo has taught me more about what it means to be a good person than anyone in my life. He has shown me that true wealth is not measured in bank accounts, but in the richness of your character, in the depth of your compassion, in the love you give and receive." She turned to Leo, a soft and loving smile on her face. "He has reminded me of who I am, of who I want to be, and for that I will be eternally grateful." She then announced her new initiative, a foundation dedicated to supporting community gardens and urban green spaces, a project that would be run by Leo, a fusion of their two worlds, a testament to their shared passion and their commitment to making the world a more beautiful place. As they left the press conference hand in hand, they were met with a barrage of questions and flashing lights, but they didn't stop, they didn't answer, they just walked through the storm together, their heads held high, their hearts full of love, and their future shining brightly before them. They had faced the world, and they had won, not by fighting but by loving, by choosing kindness over cruelty, by choosing connection over division. They were a testament to the power of love, a beacon of hope in a cynical and jaded world, a reminder that the most beautiful stories are not the ones that are written in headlines, but the ones that are written in the heart a year later. The sun shone brightly on the grand opening of the Vance Martinez Community Gardens, a vibrant oasis of green in the heart of the city. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter and music, the scent of fresh flowers and damp earth, a celebration of life and growth and the transformative power of a shared dream. Leo stood at the entrance, greeting people with a warm smile and a firm handshake. He was wearing a simple linen shirt, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, his hands still bearing the faint traces of soil. He looked happy, content at home in this world. He had helped create a world where nature and community intertwined, a world that was a living testament to his passion and his purpose. Clara was by his side, her arm linked through her emerald green dress, a vibrant splash of color against the backdrop of the gardens. She moved with a new and easy grace, a lightness in her step that had not been there before. She had shed the weight of her old life, the burden of expectations, and she had found a new and more authentic version of herself in the simple and profound beauty of this place. Sam and Mia ran through the gardens, their laughter echoing among the flowers. They were a blur of motion and joy, a living embodiment of the love that had brought their two families together. They were no longer a lost girl and a kind boy. They were brother and sister, a family forged in the crucible of love and acceptance. Later that afternoon, as the crowds began to thin, Leo and Clara stood on a small wooden bridge overlooking a tranquil pond. The water shimmered in the sunlight, a reflection of the clear blue sky above. "We did it," Leo said, his voice filled with a quiet sense of awe. "We actually did it." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, her fingers lacing through his. "No," she said softly. "You did it. I just provided the funding." "We're a team," he said, turning to face her, his eyes shining with love and admiration. "We're a family." He leaned in and kissed her, a slow and tender kiss that spoke of all the battles they had fought and one of all the dreams they had realized, of all the love they had shared. It was a kiss that promised a lifetime of shared sunrises and quiet moments, a future filled with laughter and growth and the enduring beauty of a love that had defied all odds. They had found their happily ever after, not in a fairy tale castle, but in a community garden, a place where they could nurture their love and watch it grow, a place where they could put down roots and build a life that was rich and meaningful and true. They were a testament to the fact that love knows no boundaries, no class, no limitations. It is a force of nature, a wild and beautiful thing that can bloom in the most unexpected of places. A love that can turn a simple landscaper into a rhyme king and a powerful CEO into a humble and grateful queen. A love that can truly and irrevocably change the world, one garden at a time.